2,000 years ago, on the banks of a quiet Italian river, a small cluster of huts began a journey that would one day shape the destiny of continents. We know this settlement today as Rome, but to the people of the 8th century BCE, it was simply a clearing beside the Tiber, a place of reeds, pastures, and scattered shepherd camps. From this modest landscape would rise an engine of law, architecture, and conquest, whose echoes still shape our language, our roads, and our political ideals. The story of how Rome emerged is part history, part legend, and both are worth telling. Roman authors love to trace their roots back to epic times. They believed their city had a heroic ancestor, the Trojan prince Aeneas, who, after the fall of Troy, carried his aged father through burning streets and sailed west to Italy. There he and his companions supposedly mingled with local tribes, planting the seeds of a people fated for greatness. These tales were not meant to be literal geography lessons. They were moral blueprints. They spoke of duty to family, loyalty to allies, and the courage to build after catastrophe. Even as later historians tried to separate fact from fable, the idea that Rome sprang from survivors who refused to surrender gave its citizens a powerful sense of mission. Another, more famous legend tells of twin infants left to perish by the waters of the Tiber. Their names were Romulus and Remus, descendants of Aeneas through their mother, Rhea Silvia. According to the tale, a she-wolf discovered the boys, nursed them, and kept them alive until a shepherd and his wife raised them as their own. When grown, the brothers decided to found a city near the place of their rescue. Disagreement over the exact hilltop turned fatal. Romulus struck Remus, becoming sole founder and giving the new city his name, Roma. Whether or not any of this happened, the story gave Romans an explanation for the toughness they prized. They were children of wilderness and conflict, destined to fight for survival. Beneath the mythology, archaeology offers a quieter but equally compelling picture. Excavations on the Palatine Hill reveal post holes from simple huts dating to the mid-8th century BCE, suggesting a community of farmers and herdsmen. The soil still bears traces of early hearths, indicating family groups living close together, sharing labor and protection. Nearby burial grounds show a society with leaders and craftsmen, signs of organization already forming around the settlement. Geography played an unsung role in Rome's rise. The Tiber provided fresh water and an easy crossing between sea trade routes and inland paths. 7 gentle hills formed natural lookout points and defensive terraces, while fertile plains to the south supported grain and olive cultivation. Rome lay just far enough from the coast to be shielded from pirate raids, yet close enough to benefit from Mediterranean commerce. It sat at a crossroads linking Etruscan communities in the north with Greek colonies in the south, absorbing influences from both. By the later 8th century, Latin-speaking tribes along the river were coalescing into a single identity. They borrowed building skills from their Etruscan neighbors and adopted religious practices from Greek settlers. Simple wooden shrines appeared on hilltops. Seasonal festivals honored rustic deities of harvest and hearth. Even at this early stage, the mixture of traditions would become a Roman hallmark. The ability to learn from others and weave foreign threads into a distinctly local fabric. Daily life for these first Romans was modest. Families lived in one-room huts with thatched roofs. Men tended flocks or small plots, while women managed household fires and weaving. Meals were humble: barley porridge, goat cheese, wild herbs. Yet communal bonds were strong. Groups gathered at dawn to discuss planting schedules or share news from traders passing along the river road. Disputes were settled by elders under open sky, giving early hints of a civic spirit that would later define the Republic. As evening settled over the hills, the smoke from cooking fires drifted above reed roofs, blending with the orange light of a setting sun. No one could have imagined that these humble scenes foreshadowed Senate chambers, aqueducts, and stone forums bustling with senators and merchants. The villagers were simply trying to survive, to build shelter, raise families, and keep livestock safe from predators along the forest edge. Yet in those quiet beginnings lay the first chapter of a drama that would span centuries. The myths of Aeneas, Romulus, and Remus remind us how stories give shape to memory, and how identity can spring from both truth and imagination. Rome's early settlers may not have foreseen legions marching under the eagle standard, but they carried within them the raw ingredients: persistence, adaptability, and a willingness to defend what they had built. As we leave these pastoral origins, the scene is set for Rome's next transformation, the Age of Kings, when leaders would organize scattered clans into a single political body, laying foundations for a republic that would one day conquer the Mediterranean world. After its legendary founding, Rome passed from myth into monarchy. According to tradition, the city was ruled by a line of 7 kings between the 8th and 6th centuries BCE. Whether all 7 existed as described is uncertain, but the stories associated with them reveal how Romans understood their early growth. The first king, Romulus, was remembered as both warrior and organizer. He is said to have divided the population into tribes, created a senate of 100 elders called patres, and established religious rituals that bound the people together. Rome was not just a collection of huts anymore. It was becoming a community with structure. His successor, Numa Pompilius, gave Rome peace and spirituality. While Romulus represented strength, Numa symbolized wisdom. He introduced sacred festivals, priesthoods, and the worship of gods like Janus. Romans later credited him with building bridges between clans, tempering violence with law and religion. The pairing of Romulus and Numa became a symbol of Rome's balance between war and order. Later kings such as Tullus Hostilius and Ancus Marcius brought contrasting qualities. Tullus was fiercely militant, waging wars against neighboring Latin towns. Ancus, by contrast, expanded Rome's territory through colonization and constructed vital infrastructure like the first bridge across the Tiber. These early rulers reflected Rome's dual instincts: conquest and consolidation. The last 3 kings, often called the Etruscan kings, demonstrated Rome's growing contact with the advanced Etruscan civilization to the north. Tarquinius Priscus initiated major public works, including drainage systems like the Cloaca Maxima, which transformed marshland into usable city space. Servius Tullius introduced new social classes based on wealth, reorganized the army, and built city walls that expanded Rome's boundaries. Under his rule, the population grew rapidly and Rome began to look like a true city. But it was the final king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, whose tyranny shattered the monarchy. Roman tradition paints him as arrogant and oppressive, relying on violence rather than consensus. His family's infamous crimes, particularly the assault of a noblewoman named Lucretia by the king's son, outraged the aristocracy. In 509 BCE, noble leaders and common citizens alike rose in rebellion. Tarquin was expelled, and with him ended the Age of Kings. In place of monarchy, Rome forged something revolutionary: a republic, led not by a single ruler but by elected officials accountable to the people. 2 consuls would share executive power, while the Senate gained new authority. This moment, whether embellished or not, became Rome's founding myth of liberty. They would never again suffer a king. The fall of monarchy left deep marks on Roman identity. For centuries afterward, the word rex, king, was almost a curse in Rome. Even emperors much later avoided it, preferring titles like princeps or imperator. The memory of Tarquin's arrogance ensured that Rome's citizens would cling fiercely to the ideals of shared power, even as internal tensions and ambitious generals tested those ideals in the future. From shepherd kings to engineers, from warriors to tyrants, the monarchy period captured Rome's transformation from a cluster of villages into a structured city-state. Temples, forums, and drainage works set the stage for expansion. And with Tarquin's downfall, the Romans entered a new era. When the last Roman king, Tarquinius Superbus, was forced into exile, Rome faced a dilemma. How could a city that had grown accustomed to the rule of monarchs ensure order and stability without a single ruler? The solution would shape Roman politics for centuries: the invention of the Republic. Instead of a king, Rome now placed supreme authority in the hands of 2 annually elected magistrates known as consuls. These consuls shared power equally and could veto each other's decisions. It was a clever safeguard against tyranny. If one man grew too ambitious, his colleague could restrain him. This principle of checks and balances became a cornerstone of Roman governance. Supporting the consuls was a body that had existed under the monarchy, but now assumed far greater authority: the Senate. Originally composed of noble families, the Senate acted as an advisory council, but in practice wielded enormous influence. It guided foreign policy, oversaw finances, and advised magistrates. Though not formally democratic, the Senate represented continuity and stability in the early republic. But what about ordinary Romans, the farmers, artisans, and soldiers who made up the majority of the city? At first, political power was monopolized by the aristocratic class known as the patricians. They claimed exclusive rights to high office and jealously guarded their privileges. Yet the common people, the plebeians, were not content to be sidelined. Tensions between the classes erupted in what historians call the conflict of the orders. Early in the Republic, plebeians began organizing collectively to demand representation and legal protections. At times, they even staged dramatic walkouts, abandoning the city en masse to show how indispensable their labor and military service were. Rome, without its workers and soldiers, simply could not function. These struggles forced compromise. The plebeians gradually won the right to elect their own officials, called tribunes of the plebs. Tribunes possessed the powerful right of veto. They could block actions by magistrates or laws that threatened the interests of ordinary citizens. This was revolutionary. For the first time in Roman history, the voice of the commoner had legal weight in government. Another major breakthrough came with the creation of the 12 tables. Before this, laws in Rome were unwritten, passed down through custom and controlled by the elite. Plebeians suspected the patricians of twisting these traditions to serve their own interests. To level the playing field, they demanded that the laws be written down for all to see. Around 450 BCE, the 12 tables were inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed in the Roman Forum. Though primitive by later standards, they established the principle that law must be transparent and binding on all citizens. By blending aristocratic leadership with popular representation, the Republic forged a unique political identity. It was neither a monarchy nor a direct democracy, but something in between, a complex system of shared power. This flexibility would allow Rome to govern not just a city, but eventually a vast empire. Culturally, the Republic also began defining itself in contrast to its neighbors. The Romans cultivated a fierce sense of discipline and civic duty. Every citizen was expected to serve in the military when called upon. Farmers laid down their plows to become soldiers, and then returned to their fields when campaigns ended. This connection between agriculture, the military, and civic virtue became a defining feature of Roman identity. As Rome expanded its influence over nearby territories, it also displayed a pragmatic approach to diplomacy. Instead of simply destroying conquered towns, the Romans often offered them varying degrees of citizenship or alliances. This policy helped integrate diverse peoples into the Republic, building loyalty and manpower for future wars. By the late 5th and 4th centuries BCE, Rome was no longer just one city among many in central Italy. It had become a rising power, equipped with a political system that combined order with adaptability. The Republic's institutions were far from perfect, inequalities persisted, and power still tilted toward the elite. But compared to monarchies of the ancient world, Rome's government was remarkably resilient. The story of Rome's Republic is not just about structures and offices. It is about the idea that no single individual should dominate unchecked. Power was to be shared, negotiated, and constrained. It was this idea that would allow Rome to endure crises, expand its territory, and eventually dominate the Mediterranean world. The foundation had been laid, but now Rome would face its first great test, not against itself but against powerful neighbors who threatened its very survival. By the early 4th century BCE, Rome had transformed from a city struggling for survival into the dominant power of central Italy. Yet its ambitions stretched further. Surrounded by rival peoples and wealthy city-states, Rome's next phase would be defined by expansion, both through war and through diplomacy. The Republic first clashed with its immediate Italian neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, the Samnites to the east, and the Greek colonies in the south. These conflicts were brutal and exhausting, sometimes lasting decades. But Rome had one crucial advantage: resilience. Even after defeats, the Romans refused to surrender. They rebuilt their armies, adapted tactics, and eventually wore down their enemies. By the end of the 3rd century BCE, Rome had unified most of the Italian peninsula under its control. But the Republic's greatest challenge still lay ahead: a confrontation with another rising superpower: Carthage. Carthage, located in modern-day Tunisia, was a wealthy maritime empire. Its fleets controlled trade across the western Mediterranean, from North Africa to Spain, Sicily, and beyond. Where Rome relied on citizen soldiers and agricultural strength, Carthage built its power on commerce, naval supremacy, and mercenary armies. The collision between these two powers was inevitable. Their rivalry erupted in the Punic Wars, a series of 3 epic conflicts that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean world. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE over the strategic island of Sicily. Rome, a land-based power with little naval tradition, was forced to innovate. Legend says that when the Romans captured a Carthaginian warship, they reverse-engineered it, building fleets of their own. To compensate for their inexperience at sea, they invented the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to turn naval battles into infantry fights, where they excelled. After more than 2 decades of grinding warfare, Rome finally emerged victorious, seizing Sicily as its first overseas province. It was a milestone. Rome was no longer confined to Italy. It was now a Mediterranean power. But the Second Punic War would test Rome like never before. In 218 BCE, a Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca launched one of the most audacious campaigns in military history. Instead of attacking by sea, Hannibal marched his army, including war elephants, across Spain, through Gaul, and over the snow-covered Alps into Italy itself. The Romans were stunned. Hannibal won a string of devastating victories, including the Battle of Cannae, where tens of thousands of Roman soldiers were killed in a single day. For years he roamed Italy, seemingly unstoppable. Yet despite his brilliance, Hannibal lacked the resources to capture Rome itself. The city's walls and the Republic's stubborn spirit held firm. Meanwhile, Rome adapted. Under the leadership of generals like Scipio Africanus, the Romans shifted strategy, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal in Italy, and instead striking at Carthaginian holdings abroad. Eventually, Rome invaded North Africa itself. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio decisively defeated Hannibal, forcing Carthage to surrender. The Second Punic War transformed Rome. It had faced near destruction and emerged stronger, more confident and more ruthless. Carthage was left weakened but not destroyed. Finally came the Third Punic War, decades later. By then, Carthage was a shadow of its former self, yet still a rival in trade. Roman politicians, eager to eliminate the threat once and for all, demanded war. The statesman Cato famously ended his speeches with the words, "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed. In 146 BCE, after a brutal siege, Rome captured and obliterated the city. Carthage was burned, its population enslaved, and its lands annexed. The once mighty maritime empire vanished, while Rome stood supreme in the western Mediterranean. The Punic Wars were more than military victories. They marked Rome's transformation from a regional Italian power into a global empire. But with this success came new challenges: vast provinces to govern, enormous wealth to manage, and growing inequalities between rich and poor. The Republic had won the Mediterranean, but maintaining its balance at home would prove even harder. Behind the marble temples and battlefields of Rome lay something even more fascinating: the daily life of its people. To truly understand the Republic, we must look beyond its armies and politics and glimpse the society that held it all together. At the heart of Roman life was the family, or familia. The father, known as the pater familias, held absolute authority over his household. He could arrange marriages, manage property, and even decide matters of life and death within the family. This strict hierarchy reflected the Roman belief that order and discipline began at home and extended outward to the Republic itself. Marriage in Rome was more than a personal union. It was a contract between families, designed to secure alliances and property. Women managed households, raised children, and often exerted quiet but meaningful influence, though their formal rights were limited. Despite these restrictions, Roman women were generally more free than their Greek counterparts, appearing in public and managing estates when necessary. For most citizens, life was tied to the rhythms of agriculture. Farmers woke at dawn to till fields of wheat, barley, and olives. Their labor was not just for survival, it was seen as virtuous. Romans glorified the farmer soldier, the man who defended the republic with a sword and sustained it with his plow. Simplicity, hard work, and frugality were celebrated values. But as Rome expanded, wealth began to change society. Victorious generals returned from campaigns with treasure, slaves, and luxury goods. The patrician elite decorated their villas with mosaics and marble statues, while poor citizens crowded into modest homes or insulae, apartment blocks that could be noisy and dangerous. Inequality widened, planting seeds of future unrest. Religion was woven into every aspect of Roman life. The Romans believed their success depended on maintaining good relations with the gods through ritual. Temples dotted the city, and public festivals marked the calendar. Priests, augurs, and Vestal virgins safeguarded Rome's spiritual health, interpreting omens and keeping sacred fires burning. Yet Roman religion was pragmatic. Conquered peoples could keep their own gods, who were often absorbed into the Roman pantheon. This inclusiveness made Rome spiritually flexible and politically wise, helping integrate diverse cultures into the Republic. Education was another pillar of Roman culture. Boys of wealthy families studied literature, rhetoric, and philosophy, often modeled after Greek traditions. They learned to speak persuasively, for in Rome the ability to sway crowds and senators was the key to power. Girls, while excluded from formal education, were still taught to manage households and could become highly literate in cultured families. Public entertainment reflected Rome's love of spectacle and community. Citizens flocked to theaters, races, and religious festivals. Music, poetry, and storytelling brought people together, reinforcing shared values. Though gladiatorial combat would not dominate until later, even in the Republic the taste for public games was growing. Social status defined every Roman's place in life. Patricians held ancestral prestige, plebeians represented the common backbone of the city, and slaves, captured in war or born into servitude, made up a large portion of the population. Slaves performed labor from household chores to tutoring children, yet some could earn or buy freedom and even rise in status. The Roman sense of virtues, courage, duty, and honor was deeply ingrained. A good Roman citizen was expected to sacrifice for the Republic, whether by paying taxes, serving in the army, or placing public needs above private comfort. This collective spirit fueled Rome's rise but also placed enormous pressure on individuals to conform. In many ways, Rome's society was a mosaic. Stern fathers, dutiful mothers, hardworking farmers, ambitious politicians, pious priests, playful children, and countless slaves. Together they formed a culture that balanced tradition with adaptation, simplicity with ambition. But beneath this order, cracks were forming. Wealth from conquests was transforming values, shifting Rome away from its rustic roots toward luxury and inequality. The Republic's virtues, discipline, modesty, and civic duty were being tested by greed and ambition. As the Republic grew richer and more powerful, its social fabric began to strain. Soon these tensions would collide with politics, leading to unrest and conflict within the city itself. The Roman Republic was a marvel of balance, a system built on tradition, civic duty, and the consent of citizens. Yet beneath its sturdy pillars lay pressures that would test its survival. By the late Republic, cracks were appearing in its foundation, and history was steering Rome toward transformation. One major tension was the widening gap between rich and poor. The spoils of conquest brought wealth to Rome's elite, who built grand villas and funded lavish games. But the common citizen, the backbone of the Republic, often remained poor, dependent on grain handouts and temporary work. This imbalance sparked unrest and deepened class divisions. Political competition grew fierce. Ambitious generals began to leverage the loyalty of their armies to gain political power. Leaders like Marius and Sulla blurred the lines between military and political authority, setting dangerous precedents. The Republic's system of checks and balances was strained under the weight of personal ambition. At the same time, Rome's expansion brought cultural change. Conquered peoples brought their gods, customs, and ways of life. Rome absorbed them willingly, but integration also diluted the old traditions. The Roman sense of identity began to shift. What once bound citizens together, shared values, shared hardship, shared duty, was giving way to personal gain and factional politics. The Republic faced another challenge: governance. As Rome grew to dominate vast territories, its existing institutions struggled to manage distant provinces. Corruption spread among governors, and the administration became increasingly unwieldy. Reform efforts, though sincere in many cases, often met fierce opposition. The growing unrest and political instability foreshadowed a transformation of Rome itself. The Republic, celebrated for centuries as the embodiment of civic virtue, was heading toward an era of civil war. Out of this turbulence would rise a new form of governance, the empire. But before that transformation, Rome would have to confront its deepest test yet: the rise of a man who would change the course of history. Gaius Julius Caesar, a brilliant general, a charismatic leader, and a master of politics, would come to embody both the glory and the danger of Rome's ambitions. His story was not yet fully written. The Republic still stood, and its fate hung in the balance. What would follow was a chapter in history defined by power struggles, conspiracies, and revolutions. A chapter that would forever change the face of Rome and the world. The fall of the Republic was not the end, but a new beginning. And the story of Rome was far from over. This was just a glimpse into the heart of the Roman Republic, its society, culture, and the subtle cracks that would lead to its transformation. In the next episode, we will dive into Rome's greatest crisis, the social wars, the rise of populist leaders, and the dramatic path that led to Julius Caesar's rise and the fall of the Republic. Chronidex is your time portal to history, where the past comes alive in vivid detail. Subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss an exploration into the eras that shaped our world. The story continues.